Hi, this is Tim Brown with Football Archaeology. We're all familiar with hash marks. They're the short white stripes on football fields that indicate where the football is placed when it goes out of bounds or when the ball is declared dead between the hash marks and the sideline. However, most of the lines we generically call hash marks are actually Lockney lines. They represent 80% of the stripes on a football field, and they were invented in 1954 by John Lockney. Today, we'll review John Lockney's story and how he came to invent Lockney lines. To help tell the story, I'll be joined in a few minutes by Tom Lockney, one of John's sons. The invention of Lockney lines is underappreciated, and that's the reason he has earned membership in the Football Archaeology Hall of Fame. Now, to ensure we're all on the same page and can distinguish hash marks from Lockney lines, let's look at the field diagram from the 1954 NCAA rulebook, which came out before Lockney lines were developed. You can see that there are two sets of short lines that run perpendicular to and intersect the yard lines. We're all familiar with hash marks, but they didn't exist on football fields until the NFL and the NCAA added them in 1933. Now, the 1957 NCAA field diagram shows that Lockney lines are the short stripes that run parallel to the yard lines. They're found in the areas near the hash marks and along both sidelines. So we refer to the set near the hash marks as inner Lockney lines, and those near the sidelines are outer Lockney lines. Early on in their development, the outer Lockney lines were optional and were often laid on the field outside the sideline, not inside as we know them today. Before hash marks came along, wherever a play ended on the field of play, the next play started from that spot. It didn't matter if the play ended in the middle of the field or 1 yard from the sideline. Wherever the previous play ended, the next play started there. So if a play ended next to the sideline, that's where the next play started. Now here's a few images of plays from earlier in football history where teams were running plays set along the sideline. We've got a play of Indiana from about 1916, TCU from 1922, and Idaho from the mid-1920s. On the other hand, when the ball went out of bounds, the offensive center would walk the ball up to 10 yards in from the sideline. He would then set the ball down, and his team would call a play at the line of scrimmage, and then they'd snap the ball. Now that process took some time, so to speed up the process and eliminate plays set along the sideline, the NCAA and the NFL both added hash marks 10 yards in from the sideline for the 1933 season. The hash marks were subsequently moved further towards the middle over the years, but the distance now varies at the high school, college, and pro levels, but they serve essentially the same function. Hash marks were a significant innovation for football. However, despite hash marks changing the game's strategy and pace of play, they didn't solve football's accuracy problem. That is, since the yard lines were 5 yards apart, officials often struggled to accurately spot the ball between the yard lines. The challenge was something like a carpenter trying to make precise cuts using a ruler marked only at the every inch line and lacking the half, quarter, and eighth inch lines. They just couldn't mark the ball with the precision they needed until Lockney lines came along. So Lockney lines solved two problems. One was that they helped officials mark the ball more accurately, but they also helped spectators, announcers, and the press observe the game more accurately and have a better sense of whether a ball carrier had made the first down or not. They simply provided everyone observing the game with a better sense of where the ball was on the field of play. So, with that introduction, now let's introduce Tom Lockney. So, Tom, welcome to the Football Archaeology Hall of Fame series.
An honor to be here.
Yeah, well, it should be fun. I mean, we've talked before and exchanged messages and things in the past, and you've helped me with research, and I think I filled in some blanks for you. So, anyways, it's a real pleasure. So, I guess with all that background, and I've told the audience that your dad invented these Lockney lines. Can you give a little bit of a picture of your dad's background and how it was that he came to influence the game?
Well, he was a fanatic football fan, and in the true sense of the word, he went to every game that he could. I think I remember growing up, he would sometimes drag my brother and me to the games. My brother was more reluctant than me, but I grew up liking football. It's just that he was so intense, uh, and he watched as many games each weekend as he could. Uh, and thanks to you, I know now that he played in high school, or at least he was on the team, he was in the picture, but he never told stories about anything on the field when he was playing. So I just assumed because he was not a good athlete that he didn't play. But he loved sports. He went to lots of basketball games too. He took me to my first hockey game, I remember, and he was just a sports fanatic.
And so, what kind of time frame did he go to high school and then college? Just to kind of set the stage.
Um, well, I don't remember the date, so he was born in 1915, I think.
Yeah.
So he would have gone to college 18 years later. He went to Wisconsin, and he was a Wisconsin Badger, except he never graduated. Uh, and I just grew up thinking if I go to college, that's where I got to go to college, and I did. But as far as I know, he didn't finish because he was a big party guy, and he was in a fraternity, and I don't know the details because he didn't talk as much about that, but I'm assuming that he didn't do well, which is ironic because he preached grades to me and my brother.
Yeah.
Grades are really important, and finishing and etc. But in terms of football, he couldn't get enough. Is the way to put it.
So, what did he do? What was his occupation, and how was he connected to football in any way, kind of formally?
Not well, not in terms of money or work. He had a variety of jobs. They ran my mother and father in Waukesha, where near the Little Five Points. He ran a custard shop for a while, and I think that I don't know if they sold it or it just wasn't making a living. And eventually ended up at the Fall Corporation, which is in downtown Milwaukee, and they manufacture gears. They're one of the world's leading gear manufacturers. And his title, as I remember it, was inventory control manager. But I think he worked his way up to being a manager, and he loved that company, in part for political reasons, but I won't go there.
Okay. Well, and so, in some of the research, I found examples of him, like he was either president or some kind of leader in a local downtown quarterbacks club in Waukesha. Do you remember him being involved in that?
Well, yes and no. I remember him being involved in stuff like that, but it wasn't until you found that photo in the Waukesha Freeman of him presenting an award that I specifically remembered the name of the quarterback club.
Okay.
But I remember that he knew all the coaches at the high schools, both Waukesha High School, there was only one back then, and Catholic Memorial, the Catholic high school. And so he was involved with football in that sense, not as a job, but socially. It was
Yeah.
it was, it was a big part of his social life.
Okay. Well, you also said he was a pretty social guy, and that he knew a guy. You've
Yeah,
told me that in the past. He was kind of a knew a guy sort of person.
yeah. He knew a lot of guys, but he would say whenever I would say, I told you the story. Whenever I need cleats for football, he'd say, "Well, we're going to this sporting goods store. The name, which I remember, we had to drive all the way down to where near where he worked. I think it was on Wisconsin Avenue in Milwaukee, because he knew a guy, and that's the way he would. I know a guy who can help you with that. I know a guy who knows it, and you don't want to go to a guy who doesn't know anything. It's got to be know a guy who knows something.
Yeah. Well, so okay, you've kind of painted the picture. He's kind of an everyday guy, but definitely really serious football fan, but not directly involved in the game. And yet, he creates these things that solved a problem for football. And so, can you kind of describe kind of the nature of the field or the problem that your dad solved?
Yeah, and I remember this is I was pretty young. What was it 54? Was that when they were?
54, yeah.
Yeah, so I was born in 45, so I was only 9 years old. But as I said, I would get taken to the games, and I remember him yelling a lot at the referees and the coaches when they made bad decisions. See, he was into the game, and everybody around him knew that he was into the game. And one of his pet peeves was misplacement of the ball after a play when they walked it back, or a penalty, like an out of bounds play or a penalty. And when you're sitting up in the stands, you got a good sight line if it was right in front of you of the lines 5 yards apart. But they would sometimes be off by a yard. You could see it, and my dad would yell, "That's the wrong placement!" And so it was his pet peeve. Plus, the games were longer because they had to keep bringing the chains out to see if there was a first down, even when it was obvious that it was or wasn't a first down from the stands.
Yeah. So, and I think it's really interesting that it's one of those things, you don't think about uh, how difficult it was, an incomplete pass to the right side. If the ball was on the left hash,
Yeah.
trying to get that ball spotted again. And, you've got just markings 5 yards apart.
I,
Um,
I don't think I told you this before, but I worked for 4 summers as a college student as a land surveyor's assistant. And I know how hard it is, looking just 5 yards apart to try to accurately gauge a distance. It's almost impossible to be correct.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and so then sometime before the 1954 season, your dad came up with an idea and apparently, shared it with a couple of his high school buddies uh, to add markings to the field. So to add these stripes that became, Lockney lines to the field. And so, um,
Well,
you know,
can I interrupt for a
yeah,
second? Because I think I thought about this after we talked earlier. Um, he had an idea first, which his first idea was 100 lines, lines every yard. And I don't remember how I knew that. I don't know if he talked about it at home or maybe he was with his high school friends. Well, they were out of high school, but his old high school buddies drinking. But somehow I heard that that was his idea. And the reason that that was a bad idea was because of, and I don't even know what, some called it chalk. I used to think it was lye or something, but whatever they marked the fields with would get on the players' uniforms. And so there were two reasons that idea evolved is because the players would have been covered with white if there were that many lines with
yeah,
that stuff. And also it just wouldn't look good. I mean,
yeah,
aesthetically to have 100 lines. So it evolved from 100 lines so that they can accurately place the ball to, and I don't know when or how it came in his mind. He said, "Well, how about just shorter lines?" Uh, and I don't know how he came up with the idea of 4 sets.
yeah. There was somebody suggested the 1 yard stripes, stripes, full stripes every 1 yard, like back around 1902 as
Oh,
well, and it never went anywhere. you know, so that's really interesting that was the original idea. Um, so, I mean, one of the neat things is that your, we're going to show a picture of your dad and friends with a template marking the field for the first time. So they created a template and to basically run the chalk over this whatever it was sheet metal template and um, several of the guys helping him were high school teammates, and so we're showing them in the high school team picture as I'm talking here. Anyways, I just think it's really cool that old high school friends ended up helping.
Uh, well, and I knew one of those guys well. He was still. We would have Thanksgiving dinner or something together with the families. I don't remember my dad with Spud Cooley, one of the guys, or anybody else ever talking about their exploits playing football. So maybe they were all subs for all I know, and on the B team or something and didn't get in. But they all clearly got involved in the marking the field, and presumably they were all fans of
Yeah,
the.
yeah,
You know what Wisconsin's like. You got two teams, the Badgers and the Packers, at the highest college and pro level, and so it's kind of a state where you got to be a football. Well, if you're a football fan, you got to pick one of those two. I'm not going to
yeah.
mention Marquette because they don't.
So, so one way or another, your dad reaches out to the Waukesha High School coach or athletic director and ends up getting permission to mark the field with this kind of new gimmicky idea. Um, and so the first game that's actually played with the Lockney lines is Waukesha versus West Milwaukee High School in September of 1954. The next day, Carroll College, which is also located in Waukesha, plays UW Whitewater on the same field. So that becomes the first college game played with Lockney lines on the field. Do you remember any, or can you tell us anything about the initial reaction people had to the lines? Because I understand your dad kind of had a habit of collecting information and reactions from
Yeah.
people.
Well, I don't. I was 9 or 10 years
Yeah,
old. I
yeah,
don't remember. What I remember was he didn't just mark the field and then say, "Let's see what happens." He was very organized, and he knew he would go and introduce himself to the opposing coaches. He would talk with reporters, and he did surveys. Now I don't remember the details of that after the first two games with Carroll and Waukesha High School, but he was very proud of his meticulous collection of reactions, which were I don't remember him ever saying, one official thought it was a stupid idea. I don't remember any time. Maybe he just didn't tell me, but it was overwhelmingly positive. I'm sure of that.
yeah. One of the things that the newspapers reported, during the time was that first high school game, they didn't have to bring the chains out onto the field a single time.
Yeah.
Which kind of was exactly the kind of thing your dad was trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that was luck or what, but they must have had some interesting conversations about how you would use the lines and placing the ball and all of that. So
Yeah. So then, so then what I think is pretty cool. I mean, so it's neat that he gets these lines and they're, installed and they're used for high school and a small college game. But I think the story of how he gets the University of Wisconsin involved is really fun too. So he's enough of a fan that in 1954 he travels to the Wisconsin game at Michigan State, which the Badgers win, of course. And then, but then bad luck turns into good luck. So there's bad weather in the East Lansing area, or maybe back in Milwaukee, but his flight gets canceled, his return flight. So he ends up taking the train back, and it's the same train as the University of Wisconsin team and coaches are on. And so somewhere on that trip, he ends up talking with Gary Sant, who was the,
Guy Sunt,
I'm sorry,
Guy was
Guy. Okay.
yeah.
So he talks to Guy Sant and then Ivy Williamson. So Sant is the AD, Williamson is the head coach. And he convinces them to at least try to put the Lockney lines on Camp Randall's field for their upcoming game with Rice. Um, and so it's basically, the Badgers were number three for the coming into that game, and Rice was number 11. So big game. And so do you know, have any other like details kind of about how those lines got marked or conversations he had with them?
I honestly don't, but I remember him telling, and I don't know whether it was contemporaneous. I don't even remember. I assume he went to the game. I don't remember whether I was there or not. Probably not, because he was probably so busy selling his idea. And I also don't know. I assume that he got somebody to help him, but I assume he had something to do with the actual marking because nobody else had done it
Yeah.
at that
Well,
point.
at least some newspaper article says that was he was there supervising.
Oh, okay.
And that one of the concerns, because maybe there was weather forecast or something, one of the concerns was that if they had to put a tarp on the field, then they couldn't mark it.
Uh,
But it turned out that they were able to mark the game,
well,
or mark the field.
I remember you mentioned the rankings of the teams, but you didn't mention that back then there was the game of the week, and it was two ranked teams. We're so spoiled now. You can watch almost every college game that exists at the major level, at least. Well, that was anybody who wanted to watch a college football game on TV around the whole country. That's the game they saw. So it was maybe an accident that he had met at the time. The timing, some of this timing was accidental, that he met the coach and the athletic director, and then this big game. Because what if they had played one of their patsy games,
Right.
preseason or something? It might not have caught on, or it caught on as quickly.
Yeah. Well, and so that, I mean, to me, that's really a cool thing that so the lines are marked for a high school, and then because they played on the same field, a college game the next day. And then 3 weeks later, it's for the national TV game of the week. The Lockney lines are on there.
And I wanted to mention, you might have been going to bring this up anyway, but you can't just do it, and you can't just do it because the Wisconsin people approve it. He had to talk to the referees and the coaches from the visiting team. And I remember reading a book back when I was a kid. I was a big Celtics fan with Red Auerbach, I think was the coach, and he wrote a book about basketball coaching and stuff. And at the end of the book, he had a chapter on things I've heard some people do, and it was tricks like get a scoreboard that only your players are used to reading, so that it's hard for the other team to know how much time is left and what the score is. And he had a whole list of things like that. And I think it's because of that that he had to, the other coaches would say, "What the hell do you mean with all these extra lines on the field?" You had to tell them that it wasn't going to hurt their team and it wasn't a trick designed to help the home team. So he
Yeah.
had to do a lot of talking, and he was a good talker.
Yeah. Well, and so so you talked a little bit about the reaction to the 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 way the field was marked at the high school and college. You have any other information on kind of what was your reaction to the Rice and Wisconsin game? Any any knowledge of that?
Uh, well, as I said before, it was the national game, and everybody. Again, I don't remember what he did specifically. I'm sure he did the same thing with the coaches, the referees, etc., the officials, that he did at the high school and Carroll level. That he did that with this game. But in addition to surveys of the people he knew he needed or wanted to survey, the whole country was, the broadcasters said positive things. And people, I don't remember how it happened back then, but today we'd say people added comments online. But whatever the feedback was, people loved the lines right away from one
Yeah.
TV televised game.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll be showing this as we're talking, but um, I've got an article or two of just newspaper, headlines and stories from like 2 days later in just any, you name it, any small town in Texas or whatever, but people commenting on, hey, Wisconsin had these cool lines on the field. So it became kind of a national story. Um, and then and just it was generally just very positive. Um, So I'm also, so basically Wisconsin said, okay, we're going to keep using these lines for the rest of the season. And so, I'll be showing images of the Northwestern game with the lines on the field. And one of the things about that you can see in the images is that the lines originally were like 18 inches long, not the 2 feet long that they are today. So they look a little bit shorter, not unusual, but a little bit shorter. And then originally the Lockney lines were, so there's the inner lines and the outer lines, right? And the outer lines were actually outside the sideline, and you can see that in one of the images that I'm showing. So it's just kind of an interesting, just one of those things. We've come to accept that they're going to be on the inside, but initially they were outside of the sideline.
I don't remember how that happened, but it makes me think of it might have something to do with something we see so often today, which is the coaches going out on the field and then assistant coaches trying to push them back and players wanting to go out. And so, there's that, I don't know what you call it, the rules, protected area, I'll call it, where you're not supposed to get close. But I would guess that even despite whatever the rules were then, the players and coaches would have been standing on the Lockney lines, which would have made them less useful for a placement near the
Yeah,
line.
yeah, and well, one of the other things that so some places kept them on the outside into the 70s, but it was one of those things. Some did it one way, some did it the other. For most of that early period. But then in for like the '67 playoffs, the groundskeeper for the Chiefs, he created a white box around the field, which
Oh,
is now standard. But when he had that white box, he had to do the Lockney lines in red and blue to stand out from that white box. So I think rather than do that, then everybody just said, okay, because the white box soon became standard. So they said, let's move the Lockney lines inside. So that became that's about when it became standard that they'd be to the inside.
okay.
Um, well, so uh, you know, do you know anything else about okay, big hullabaloo about the Wisconsin Rice game, lots of positives. And so some college teams started using the Lockney lines just kind of on their own. They saw them on TV and maybe they reached out, but one way or another, people just on their own started using them. But it sounds like, your dad was a promoter, right? So he also reached out to people. Is that right?
Well, yeah, and I remember him being preoccupied is probably too strong a word, but this was a big thing in his life that his idea had caught on at the start, and he wanted to spread it. And the only evidence I have of that is the letter I showed you from the Pac. Is there still a Pac-12? Whatever, the Pacific Coast with Oregon and UCLA and USC and so forth. From he sent a letter. I don't know who he actually sent it to. Probably the commissioner, but it was the supervisor of referees, I think, that replied to him and said, "We'll be considering this." So what that tells me is, even though it spread quickly to people that wanted to use it, it didn't spread quickly as an official, we're going to mandate. Well, it did spread quickly, but he contributed to that by contacting these
Yeah.
people and telling them how it was catching on and giving them the reviews. I'm sure he sent a whole, what do we call them today, the manila envelope full of reports to these different people. So I think he did a lot of work on it.
Yeah. And just from news stories that I've found, it shows that he met with people from Sports Illustrated, and they were supposed to do a story, though I've never found evidence of that. He did like radio and TV interviews, like in Chicago and places like that. So I think that's pretty cool. Well, then the next thing then was in 1955, anyways, the Packers adopted Lockney lines. So now we're talking the NFL is not just some of the NCAA teams. And I know that the LA Rams use Lockney lines at the Coliseum in later in the '55 season too. So Anyways, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and my guess is that he had some contact with the Packers because he was a big Packer fan. And we went, I never went to a game in Green Bay until like 5 years ago with my daughter and son in law and my wife because I saw Packer games in Milwaukee. They played, it varied from year to year, but I'm remembering somewhere between 2 to 4 games in Milwaukee until they started selling out Lambeau consistently. And it was better for the Packers to be up in
Yeah,
Green Bay all the time. But I'm sure he contacted them and sent them all of his information. Now, I have no evidence that they knew who he was or anything like that, but I would guess that they, knowing about the Rice Wisconsin game, that it wasn't a hard sell.
yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's one of those. It was very fortunate, but that was a huge credibility builder. That the people saw it and just immediately liked it. You know, and so that's actually, I think, one of the coolest things about this is just that the speed at which it became so, it was adopted. So here you are, September of 54 is the first time they're marked on the field. August, September of 55, the NFL starts using them. I mean, at least the Packers are using them. And then in December of 55, the Southwest Conference and the Big Ten both say we're adopting these. We're going to require these for the 56 season. And then a couple of weeks later at the NCAA convention, they say we're going to require these for the 56 season. And then the NFL does the same thing. So they went from, Waukesha High School's field. And then whatever, 14 months later, they're an NCAA and NFL requirement. I just think that's, it's just really a cool story because there are not many situations where something goes from its birth to official status that quickly.
Well, I think you can give me your opinion, but I think it's a combination of his salesmanship and persistence and fanaticism coupled with a lot of luck and circumstances.
Yeah, but also it was just a great idea. you know, I mean, you if there's a bad idea, all the salesmanship
Right, right.
and luck isn't going to get you anywhere or not very far.
Yeah.
But just the immediate reaction was so consistently positive.
Well,
That's the amazing thing to me.
and I'm probably spinning off what you planned on talking about here, but it it was so quick that but it was also a long time ago for people who aren't my age, and people think they've always been there. When I would tell people, I'm 80 years old, when I'd tell people over the last 40, 50, 60 years, my dad invented the Lockney lines. Oh, come on. They've always been there. They didn't believe it because it was such an obvious thing once it became there. But
Yeah,
before that, it was a big problem. I mean, it used to be, now we have a replacement. Now instead of the bringing the chains out to see if it's a first down, we have the commercials. The media timeouts for a commercial and stuff like that. But it just made the game so much longer and interrupted the action.
yeah. Well, you told me a story in the past about like whether it's being at a bar or sitting around with some friends, and it was like you'd tell them your dad did this, but you had the only proof you had was a 1969 story in the Badger football program, and it's not like you carried that around in your pocket all the time.
No,
So,
back in the day, I don't think we had Xerox machines. I could have copied that page and kept it in my wallet. But no, I knew it was true, but many, many people didn't believe me.
yeah.
Most people didn't believe me.
So if these things became so popular um, and it happened quickly, your dad had to make a ton of money from them, right?
Well, that's an interesting story because when I told people if they believed me or if I had proof, which I usually didn't, that's what everyone would say. Oh, then you must be wealthy. You must have inherited all that money your dad made. And the thing was, he didn't, as far as I know, he didn't make a cent. He got trips to do some interviews and maybe to help out, I don't know, remember, but he got his, what's the cliche expression now from Martian? He got his 15 minutes of fame with a few interviews and stuff, and then that was it. And people would ask him. I remember him telling me, people would ask him, "Oh, you must be making a lot of money," because he, quote, invented that iron strip, that piece of sheet metal, not iron, but sheet metal with the holes in it where they would have the four lines in between the 5 yard marks. And his reaction in this, I remember him telling many people, was, it's anybody can make one. And there's a million ways you can do it. There's many other ways. No, they don't use those today. I don't know. Well, today we have artificial fields with it painted, but on grass turf, I don't even know what they use because there are so many different ways to do it. And he would say, so what was I going to do? I could patent something that they didn't need to use. And he didn't think he could patent the idea and get any money for it. So he would basically say, no, it's just, I don't know if he used the cliche expression, my gift to football, but he clearly thought that. I'm glad that I improved the game, because it was a pain in the butt. The mismarking and the chains coming out was something nobody liked. And he didn't get rid of all of it, but he got rid of most of it.
Yeah, I mean, nobody goes to the game to watch the chains being brought out onto the field. That's not the fun part, right? Well, that is, I just think that's great. Great stories and great perspective. Just because it's one of the things, like, I've done some of these little stories on people in the Hall of Fame, but they're long gone, right? And I haven't been in touch with any of their family. So you had a really interesting perspective on it, and because it's just, you were there, even if you were a 9-year-old kid, you were there, and remember it and him, and kind of the nature of the person that he was.
Well, I don't think we've hit on it yet today, but it wasn't just he invented. I went to the Catholic high schools 8 years, or not high school. Well, I did high school too, but that was the Catholic school, St. Mary's, which was right near Waukesha Memorial. He basically created their athletic program. What I mean by that is they needed money to buy uniforms and equipment. So he devised, well, he didn't devise it, but he got in touch with the world's finest chocolate company, and he had all the kids at the grade school go out and sell chocolate bars in order to buy. And I mean, we started in 6th grade with full pads and helmets and the whole 9 yards. And he basically created that and implemented that to where we had basketball with schools in Milwaukee. I grew up near Milwaukee. We played football with Catholic schools in Milwaukee. And why would he do that? He just was preoccupied with promoting football in that way.
Well, you also, before we started taping this, you mentioned that he had another high school classmate who was also an inventor. Can you mention who that was?
Well, that was his name was Lester Pulfus, but he became later known as Les Paul. And he invented. I looked at Wikipedia. He invented not just some of the electric pickup equipment to amplify guitars, but tons of other things in music and guitars. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that in that class, which I don't know how big it was. I don't know if you ever counted when you were looking at the yearbook from my dad's class, but I don't think it was that big.
Yes.
So you had Les Paul, and I know he was a friend because my brother said that he got to meet Les Paul and Mary Ford when they came to our house. And he said, "Boy, did you miss it, Tom? She's a real doll." But in addition to that, my father died young. He was overweight and smoked and had a stressful job. And, 1970, I think I was in law school. He died, and I mentioned that he created the program at my grade school. Well, my coach was a fellow named Felix Bruni, an Italian immigrant who had to learn English and football when he came to the U.S. He was in that photo that you have of my dad standing in the back row. He was obviously on the starting team, and he ended up playing at your alma mater, Carroll College. And And so he was my coach, and then he became my stepfather when my father died. He married my mother. So three guys in that class. Les Paul apparently didn't graduate because he went off into music during his senior year. But the inventor of the Lockney lines, Les Paul, and my stepfather, who played college football at Carroll College and was my coach. Small world.
Well, good stuff. So I just wanted to just again very much appreciate your willingness to come on, tell a story, give some kind of insight and perspective on the nature of the man your dad was, but kind of the process and the situation he was in when he invented these things. And I think it's so fun again because he wasn't in an official capacity when he created the Lockney lines. It was just he had an idea and he worked towards getting it implemented. And I think anybody who ever watches a game knows they're out there. We may miss them. We may not even think of them half the time, but they're there.
Well, I want to thank you for having me, and I know at the end of all of your stuff, because I'm a subscriber to your, is it Substack that it's called?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'll push your books because I've learned so much about football and the history of football from your books. And now I have your book to show in addition to the Wisconsin program. I can say, look, here's 3 or 4 pages on my dad. So it's in print. It's got to be true.
Yeah, well, and now it's going to be on YouTube too. So, okay, well, thank you. We'll end here, and then I'll do a little bit of closing with that. But again, thank you so much. Very much appreciate it.
You're welcome.
One of the great things about John Lockney's story is that he was an everyday guy, yet he contributed something to the game that every player, coach, official, and fan uses every time they play, coach, or observe a game. His story reminds us that everyone can influence football or another part of society. All you really need is a good idea and a willingness to put in some work, and you might be able to make it a reality. Of course, it helps if you have a really good idea, which was the case with Lockney lines. If you've made it to this point in the video, I have a request, and here it is. The NCAA refers to Lockney lines as short yard line extensions, while the NFL calls Lockney lines hash marks. Now, so whether you're a fan, a coach, a writer, or whatever your role may be, you now know how Lockney lines originated. So my request is you refer to Lockney lines as Lockney lines. Tell others about them, and perhaps by changing our words, we can give John Lockney his recognition for the contribution he made to the game. Try it out. Just call Lockney lines Lockney lines. So that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll be back soon with another video that digs into football's past here at Football Archaeology.